Welcome home, where we provide information, inspiration, and motivator after motivator after motivator. Here on America's Next, I have Christine McKay here with me today. How you doing, Christine?
I'm doing great. How are you? Thank you for having me. Honored to be here.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, I'm always looking for the next motivator I could bring here to share a story that's going to be applicable and inspirational for people. And when I came across your profile and I saw that you were a negotiator,
yes,
I was like, the last time I seen a negotiator was in a movie, and I think it was like Liam Neeson or something like that.
Yep, I think so.
Yeah, The Negotiator, and it's one of the most interesting things to be. So
I certainly love it.
Yeah. Now, before we get into that, I want to know who are you and where are you from?
So I'm Christine McKay, and I was born and raised in a tiny little town of about 500 people in north central Montana. But I currently live in downtown Los Angeles. So quite the contrast.
Yeah. Wow. Now, you've got to tell me, what was it like living in Montana?
So when I was a little girl, my dad was a ranch foreman and my mom was the ranch cook. And I literally used to ring the dinner bell so the cowboys could come from the bunkhouse to have dinner that my mom had been cooking all day long. Wow. So it was kind of idyllic when I was little, living on the ranch. My brother and I would go horseback riding, and we could play and go pretty much anywhere whenever we wanted to. And it was a lot of freedom. And it was interesting because freedom that we enjoy as a child doesn't always stay that way or feel that way as we get older. Right. And so when my dad decided he didn't want to keep working for that boss, we moved into town. And so that kind of changed things dramatically for us. So. Okay.
Now, when you say moving into town, where were you still in Montana?
Oh yeah. So the town is the 500 people, 550.
Right.
we were in the country, and we lived on a lot of acreage, and but town was this, and it still is this small place. Actually, the one of the claims to fame of my hometown, which is Big Sandy, Montana, is that one of the senators from the state of Montana is from my hometown. But the bigger claim to fame, and maybe something that some of your listeners will appreciate, is that the bass guitarist and co-founder of Pearl Jam is from my hometown.
Wow.
Yes.
You know, I was having a conversation in a barbershop just yesterday, and I was asked, if you could listen to one musical artist for the rest of your life, who would it be? And one of the gentlemen in the barbershop, he chose Pearl Jam.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So, you know, I've got to ask you now, if you could choose one artist that you listen to for the rest of your life, who would it be?
I'm definitely showing my age. It would be Depeche Mode.
Wow. Depeche Mode?
Depeche Mode, yes.
What kind of music do they make?
So I suppose, well, it was the 80s. And so it kind of indie music, I guess. Okay. Yeah, they're still around. They've been around for a long, long time. So they're still playing music. So from the 1980s and even the 90s, they are a fairly well-known band, but not somebody that many of your listeners would probably have heard of.
Wow. I mean, do they have any hits that I might know?
Personal Jesus.
Okay.
You would, if you heard it, you would know it.
Right.
Try walking in my shoes. Yeah, they have quite a few actually.
Okay. All right. Yeah, and I've also heard about the phenomenal living that there is out there in Montana. They say you've got nice, huge homes out there too.
Yeah, you can. It's like any place. whether you're in the city or whether you're in a country, right?
Mhm.
It's a world of contrasts. So
Mhm.
there are people who have, big homes and a lot of land, and then there are people who have no land and small homes and who are poor, and it's
Right.
so it varies. It's just, and
Yeah.
so it's like everywhere else, but you have a lot of space. It is called the big sky country for a reason.
Right.
It is a lot of space. There are fewer than 1 million people that live in the entire state, and it's the fourth largest state in the United States. So
So, how did that impact your school life? Did you know everybody?
oh, yes. I graduated essentially with the same 20 kids I started kindergarten with. We had a
Wow.
couple of additions and subtractions.
Okay.
Um, it was hard. The so kind of from my perspective, and I think my brother would echo this too, people's value was determined based on how much land you owned. That's how we
Okay.
felt. And we didn't own any, so we didn't have any value.
Mhm.
And so we were both bullied quite a bit, and ruthlessly so. And so it was a hard place. It was a hard place to grow up. As a matter of fact, my brother and I recently had a conversation about how angry when we were in school, especially in middle school and high school, how angry we were that our parents wouldn't move,
Mhm.
because it was such a hostile environment for us to grow up in. It was really hard, and it wasn't hard for everybody, but it was hard for some other people too. So,
Now, did that primarily stem from you all not owning land?
well, that was kind of, when you're young, you kind of look at, you try to find a thing to pin something to say, oh, this was it, right? So
Mhm.
that was kind of one of the things that we pinned things to. I mean, for me personally, not speaking about my brother, but for me, as I got older, I looked back at myself in high school or as I was growing up, and I'm like, yeah, I kind of get why kids didn't like me too much. I was always pretty confident in what I wanted, and I pretty much made sure that I got anything that I wanted. Like when we had an issue with two of our teachers in high school, our math teachers, who were also, so one of the things about growing up in a school that small is you don't have a lot of variety in what you can study in school. It's
Mhm.
pretty basic reading, writing, and arithmetic kind of thing. And so we had these two teachers. Neither of them really were supportive of girls learning math and science. And it really ticked me off. And so I screamed and yelled very loudly until we were, and it wasn't just me, there were some others as well, and we were able to get it so that we had a teacher come in to teach biology as a woman. And that
Okay.
was a huge thing. When I wanted to take a business class and they told me I couldn't do it, I made sure that I did it anyway. When I
Right.
competed in public speaking, they told me I wasn't smart enough to compete in the event that I wanted to compete in, and I did it anyway, and I became the best in my state. So it's like I just was one of those kids that whenever somebody said you can't do that, I was like, screw you. I'm going to go figure out how to do it anyway.
Right.
And I did. And as unpopular as I was when I was growing up, I was still voted most likely to succeed out of my high school, which
Mhm.
still shocks me. I was just thinking about that the other day, and I was like, that's just really weird. But I was really good at kind of making things happen for myself when I was young,
Sure.
in
You know,
spite of nonsense.
I've got to imagine out of possibly 200 students that, even in the top 10%, all of them is not going to go out there and make a change about the things that they want to see change in their world. But you were a select member of the few who would. So
It
I
didn't
see
start
why
out
you
that
might
way.
be voted like that.
Well, it didn't end up that way right after I graduated from high school,
Okay.
because I ended up pregnant and not married and living in the back of my car. So I had a 1972 Chrysler, was one of my early cars, and um, I had left home, and I ended up getting pregnant, and
Mhm.
I got evicted from my house, my trailer. I lived in a little trailer in a trailer park, and I got evicted from that. And so I stayed in the back of my car for about 5 months, and then finally got out of that situation. So I started out so I did well in high school, and then I left high school and things kind of went downhill, and it was a struggle. It was a struggle. And I have three amazing daughters. I had them all by the time I was 22,
Okay.
and was on and off welfare for just shy of a decade, and ultimately decided I didn't like that lifestyle. I'd married a man who wanted to take control of my life, and I didn't think I was qualified to make decisions. So I let him make them. And then when I decided I wanted to make decisions for myself again, he didn't like that quite so much. And so I decided I wanted a different life. And I took my daughters and went to school. And I ultimately earned my MBA from Harvard University after that as a start. So
Incredible.
it was it was a long road. It took 10 years from the time that I wrote down that goal that I was going to go to Harvard, and I made that happen with 3 kids in tow. So
Wow.
yeah.
You just let me know that you are a soldier on the playing field of life. And anybody who's out there working to overcome adversity, and whether they're having a hard time or they're right in the thick of things getting it done, they can look over and call you a peer. How old were you when you got married?
When I got married, I was 20. So I'd gotten pregnant when I was 19. So I wasn't like young. So but still teenager. And I got married when I was 20, and I had kids I got pregnant when I was 19. I had my daughter when my oldest when I was 20, and then I had one at 21 and one at 22.
Okay.
So I had 3 kids in 32 months.
Wow.
Yeah.
What did your parents think about the way that things are going in your life?
Oh, that did not go over well. No, my mom, well, my parents were very against me having my daughter. And it was really interesting because my mom's mother was a diehard Catholic. But it was also fascinating to me that when it came to me, she was like totally okay saying, go have an abortion, take care of that. My mom and dad don't have that belief. And they really wanted me to put the baby up for adoption. Mm-hmm. And they pressured me really hard to put the baby up for adoption. And I think I had decided probably within the first week of finding out that I was pregnant that I was just going to figure out how to do this on my own. Sure. And I had no idea how the heck I was going to do it, but neither of those 2 other options appealed to me. And in the end, my daughter Bree is just an amazing, amazing woman who spends her life taking care of other people's kids. She's a nanny and loves it, and she has touched the lives of dozens of children and made a difference for them. And that's pretty amazing to be able to see. So
absolutely. Can you talk to me a little bit about what was going on in your mind? What were your best thoughts at that time when you really realized that you were going to have to transform into a stronger woman if you were going to still achieve your goals?
So I'd have to say that it wasn't my thought so much as somebody else's thought on my behalf. So I met this woman, and I'm not terribly religious, but I do have a deep faith, but she was very religious. And I had just come out of living out of the back of my car, and I was taking care of the yard work for a sorority house in the town that I had, because I had left my little tiny town and was living in a bigger community. And I was taking care of the yard and doing housework and maintenance kind of stuff. And she took a piece of paper and she challenged me. She's like, if you draw a picture of God and put it in the center, and then you write 4 things on that piece of paper, kind of top, bottom, left and right, that you want to pray to God for, what would they be? And the only thing I remember on that list was that I was going to go to Harvard. And I remember going to the welfare office for the first time. And they asked me, what I was going to do. And I had gotten a job working at McDonald's. And I remember I'd actually lost a lot of weight in my pregnancy. At the beginning of my pregnancy, it was actually very dangerous. I'd lost like almost 25 pounds in my first 2 trimesters.
Wow.
And because I couldn't eat, I was like eating a can of soup a day. That was all I could afford. And I had too much pride to go on welfare at the time. And I didn't have an address. And so you can't get on welfare at the time you couldn't do if you didn't have an address, you were kind of.
Wow. Okay. Mm-hmm.
So I remember going to the welfare office for the first time, and somebody asked me what I was going to do. And I said I was going to go to Harvard, and they just laughed at me. They just laughed. But I told everyone that I was going to go to Harvard. And because of her word and her faith in me, and her name was Roxanne Eukin, and she's sadly no longer with us. But she saved my life. She saved my daughter's life, and she changed my life. She allowed me she saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. And the way that she put a mirror up so I could see the good in me was pretty amazing. And, I don't know that I would have gone to Harvard, after being in that experience, and certainly not after having 2 more kids in rapid succession. And so it was, wasn't so much what I told myself first. Somebody else told me, and I had to be open to hearing the good that was in me and to having somebody show that to me. And I had to be willing to see that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Did you have any other supports from your biological family? Were there any other relatives who were looking for you and trying to encourage you?
No, I didn't feel that they were. My brother was going through some struggles at the time. My parents were going through struggles. It was actually a pretty rough period for our family. And I don't know that our family, our nuclear unit ever really recovered from it, to be totally honest. But so there wasn't really, which was part of why when I met this guy and he quickly decided to ask me to marry him, and why I quickly decided yes, because I really didn't feel that I had a support system around me. And at least being married to this man was a way for me not to be completely alone in the process. Or so I thought.
Before we move on to the next segment, I want to know, do you have any advice that you would give to a young woman who's growing up right now, right in the middle of America, if not somewhere out west or out east or down south, and there's not very much going on in the town, and her story is kind of like yours? Would you give any advice to a 15-year-old right now?
Yes. Use the power of social media to find women like me and organizations to support you. The number one thing you need to do, or that I pray that you learn to do, is ask for help.
Okay.
Whether it's just somebody to talk to, somebody's shoulder to cry on. I mean, heck, I used to get groceries at the food bank. People would just drop groceries off at my house. Being willing to ask for help. And it's hard because we're taught to, have pride. And so having to receive something, I actually often, because of the situation that I was in, I often have said to people that you really can't truly know what it is to give until you have been forced to receive. Because the humility, not even the humility, and it's frustrating and embarrassing and angering, and it just is so demoralizing to have to be in a position where you have to have somebody help you in that way to survive and to get through something like that. Right. But so once you kind of can let go of that, and you can start to ask for more of what you need and more of what you want, then you'll be in a much better position.
Wow. And then you also, through that experience of service, you begin to develop character, like real authentic character. And so, later on in life, when you're at the poker table of life, so to speak, it's harder for people to call your bluff because you're actually tough.
It's definitely, I mean, I've seen a lot of life. I've seen a lot of people. After I graduated from business school, I got to work with a lot of Fortune 500 companies. And I've been fortunate enough to work in almost 53 countries.
Wow.
And well, not almost, actually in 53 countries. And, and so I've seen a lot of culture. I've seen a lot about people. And I was recently was filling out something for somebody, and they said, they asked this, they were doing a kind of like a spotlight thing on me, for a club I'm in. And they asked me, what gives you hope?
Okay.
And without even thinking of it, my response was humanity.
Wow. Okay.
Humanity gives me hope. Just people are people everywhere. We all want the same things. We want to be loved. We want to love. We want to contribute. We want to see, we want roof over our head. We want shelter. We want food. But at the core, at our basic needs, we all are the same. And we focus so much on the differences that we forget that we're the same. We
Wow.
forget that similarity. And, when you go through trauma and you're young, if you allow yourself to find a way, if you look for mentors and people to help you get through that trauma, and you come through the other side of that, and you start to reflect, you can see how the benefit of that trauma actually has had on your life. It sounds weird, but I have a black belt in martial arts, and the katana sword is made by folding metal on metal. You heat it,
Okay.
you beat the crap out of it, and then you fold it over, and you do it time and over and over and over and over again. But it's that heating things up and then beating it down, and we grow that way. We become stronger that way. And I find young people who've been through trauma to be very resilient. And if you look at what's going on in our world today, the people who can persevere and the people who have resilience are the ones who are going to run this nation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. As they say, the meek shall inherit the earth.
Absolutely.
Meek being people who are teachable, humble, strong, faithful, without a doubt. Now, when did you earn this black belt?
Oh God, I was probably in my mid 30s. I think I was 35 when I earned my black belt.
And you were just tough. You said, not only am I going to be a successful mom, I'm also going to go get a black belt in what? In what martial art?
It's a form of kung fu.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was a lot of fun. I loved it. My husband and I trained together.
Okay.
I'd be black and blue all over and go to the doctor, and they're like, you okay? And I'm like, yeah, we're fine. Trust me, we beat the heck out of each other in class all the time.
Are you able to like karate chop wooden planks and break them?
Oh no, I haven't trained for a while now. So I still have my belt, but I haven't trained for quite a while. So
wow.
I still remember a lot of the moves. So no, I'm definitely right. Like I dye my hair funky colors. Like this is so faded for me. Like tomorrow I get my hair done and it'll be some other color that I don't even know what it's going to be. It's whatever my hairstylist decides. And do martial arts. Used to do that, and I ride motorcycle. So I like doing some of that stuff. It reminds me that life.
Here I am thinking you're rad, but in fact you're totally rad. So wow. I want to know, how did you do it? How did you get to Harvard College, Harvard University? A lot of the time when we think of the Ivy Leagues, particularly Harvard, we think impossible. We think not for me. We think I won't get in. We think that's for them. How did you go from living in your vehicle, a failed marriage, not necessarily a failure because you take a lesson from everything, but a marriage that didn't work,
yep,
to Harvard?
So there's this father-son team called Dick and Rick Hoyt out of Massachusetts. And I I can't remember which one's the dad and which one's the son, but the dad was a runner, and his son has spastic cerebral palsy, and decided one day that he wanted to run the Boston Marathon. And so his dad created a cart so that he could push his son and run the Boston Marathon. And for years and years and years, the Boston Marathon would not give the dad a number, so he couldn't be an official runner in the marathon. Mm-hmm. And eventually he did. And then his son decided that he wanted to do a triathlon. So you can find Rick and Dick Hoyt on Google and see all sorts of stuff, but he would strap a dinghy to his back and swim in the ocean, pulling his adult son in the dinghy. He'd then ride with him in a basket in the front seat, in front of the bike, and then he'd push him in the marathon part of the triathlon. And he did that so that when he crossed the line, his son was always there first. Wow. And somebody asked him once, they have a book called, I think it's called Over the Mountain. And they asked the dad often, how did you do it? And my answer is the same as his. I don't know. I just did it. I hit a point where I believed it was possible. And it took me a long time to get to that point. But the moment I decided that it was possible, it was really possible, because something had changed in my mind and I believed in myself. I believed I could do it. And again, I had people who told me. I went to a community college, right? And in my community college, I had a professor, I was his diamond in the rough, and we were super poor, and I had an assignment that I had to turn in, and I had to turn it in an old 3-ring binder. And that was part of the assignment, is how you were going to turn it in. You had to print it out, written out, whatever, and you had to be a 3-ring binder, blah, blah, blah. I couldn't afford a 3-ring binder. So I turned in my assignment without a 3-ring binder, and he failed me. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I can't afford a 3-ring binder. And he said, if it's important, he's like, how important is it for you to get an A in this class? And I said, because I had a 4.0 GPA. And I was like, it's very important. He said, well, then I guess you'll figure out how to get a binder.
Right.
So I figured out how to get a binder, and I got an A in that damn class, and I still have that binder today.
Yeah.
Dang thing. But there's that moment in time when, if we listen to ourselves. So one of the things I think that's hard when you're young, certainly was for me, and of course I had 3 little kids running around, but I think when it's hard for anybody, but especially when you're young, there's times when it's just hard to quiet your mind and let your mind talk to you, because our minds get in the way. Mm. Our brain is wired. We are hardwired to play things safe. Okay. Our brain is all about protecting us, right? It's all about telling us, what to do to stay safe, right? So then when we get these big thoughts and these big ideas, and we, and then we've got people who are afraid but well-meaning for us, our parents, or somebody, some person in our life who is important to us. It could be a pastor or a teacher or anything, and they're like, don't do that. That's, you're not going to have a lot of success at it. Don't follow that. Go study this. Go do this. This play it safe thing. And you see adults doing this all the time, right? That's why there are so many people who are miserable in their jobs, because they're playing it safe, because their brain is playing it safe. And so when you get a moment of clarity, when you quiet your mind and you start listening to kind of this different part of your brain and that safety things, you start to kind of override it, and you go, oh, that is possible. I can do that. And then you start surrounding yourself with people who reinforce that. You can do this. Of course you can do this. This is absolutely doable. Of course you can do it. Right? And my professors at community college, when I told them that I wanted to go to Harvard, they did not laugh at me. They actually believed me. They helped me believe it. They furthered my own belief in myself that I could do it. And so surrounding yourself with people who are going to reinforce your dreams is important, but quieting your mind so you can actually listen to what your dream is. Here's an interesting thing for folks. So when I was at Harvard, I did career coaching for students for quite a while. And I worked with these amazing guys who ran the career program at Harvard Business School. And they told me something that I will never forget, that I tell every young person I ever meet. No matter how much the adults in your life love you and care about you, you still know best what you love to do. By the time we're 16 years old, we know what we love to do, what gets you through high school, what gets you up in the morning. Those things are going to matter to you for the rest of your life. I'm starting my own podcast, my own show. And the thing that I loved doing when I was in high school is public speaking and radio.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Right. So I'm just getting that thing going. And don't wait.
And you're great for it too.
Don't wait 40 some years to do it. Do it sooner rather than later. But at the age of 16, you know what you love to do. You just don't have the right language necessarily because you don't have the experience, and neither do most of the adults around you.
That is key.
Find the adults who have experience doing what you love and start meeting them. Connect up with them on social media. Give them a shout out. You never know. It's not like you have the connection now, so you can try to get the connection. And if you don't have the connection tomorrow, so what? Nothing's happened. But what happens if they respond and they say yes because you asked?
Right. What you're saying is so key. Ladies and gentlemen, we're dealing with a titan here today. I want you guys to stay tuned for the second segment here with Christine McKay. America's Next Motivator, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern, Tuesday and Thursday at 10 a.m. Eastern. America's Next Motivator, hosted by me, Cedric Riley, and sponsored by the Pride Empowerment Network. And we're back. Christine, how you feeling?
Feeling great.
That's good to hear. Before we went on a break, you were talking about how when you get ready to venture into your next chapter of life, that chapter where you're going to be what you're going to become, there's going to be a time frame there where you're not going to be able to explain what it is that you're trying to get out. But at that very moment, you need to find people who have the keywords, who have the language, who have that conversation to help you to manifest into who you're trying to become. I thought that was huge. Absolutely huge. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. I wish that I had known that.
I mean, and so we know that now. For those of us who might be, in the latter ages of life, who they still want to create a podcast, they still want to get out there and be in media, they still want to be an actor, they still want to do something. Let's call it X. It's not too late for you to go out there, find a mentor, learn the language, learn the keywords, read a book, and get to it. We'll be looking for you.
Absolutely.
Christine, I got to know, how old were you and what was it like when you did your first negotiation?
So like my first professional negotiation, I suppose my mother would say I've been negotiating my whole life, but the first negotiation like professionally that I did was well, I after I had finished community college, I went to a 4-year school, finished my bachelor's degree at a school in upstate New York,
Mhm.
and I was able to get an amazing job with what is now Verizon. So it was with a company called Bell Atlantic, and Verizon is the company that was created when Bell Atlantic and NYNEX merged in the 1990s. And I found an opportunity to do international mergers and acquisitions.
Okay.
And that's really the time when I really, like, I was put in the first country I worked in was Indonesia. And I was working with people in the government, people in the Indonesian telephone company. From there, I went to Europe. And the negotiation, though, that really kind of struck home for me was it was right before this is so long ago. The euro did not exist.
Wow.
The euro did not exist.
Okay.
So every country had its own currency, and every country had state owned companies, like their phone companies, their airlines were state owned. I mean, they just had a lot of state owned companies. So they started to sell those state owned companies so that they could participate in the euro. So I was working in Belgium,
Okay.
and they were selling us a part of their state-owned telephone company called Belgacom. And I was 28, I think.
Okay.
So I was 28, and I remember sitting in the room, and my COO, my chief operating officer, was sitting next to me, and I had coached him through the negotiation. So we had a minister of finance, minister of telecommunication, the senior executives from Belgacom across the table. And my COO says exactly the things that I told him not to say. And I remember kicking him under the table. Do not do that. I do not recommend doing that.
Right.
Do not kick your boss under the table to make a point. But I did. I kicked him under the table. And it was then that I knew that there was something that I could see things from a different perspective, that I could see. I knew that by saying the things that he was saying, that I had told him not to say, I had anticipated what the reaction was going to be on the other side. And I was right in that. And it was the first time that I recognized that I had this ability to kind of, well, somebody just described it as, I can hear the words that are coming out of somebody's mouth when they're speaking, and I can listen to the words they're saying, but I also hear the words that are going on in their head, that they're telegraphing through nonverbal communication.
Mm-hmm.
And the tone of their voice. And I'm really good at that. And so it was then that I realized how much that negotiation was a thing. And then I just kept making it part of my career. It became something I did in every job I had and every project I worked on. I found ways to create opportunities to have more formalized negotiation, whether I was working in sales, whether I was working in purchasing departments and procurement departments, helping companies buy things, or whether I was doing mergers and acquisitions and looking for investors and helping investors buy or sell companies. And so that's why I decided to make a business out of it and do that for a living. And
I think that's phenomenal, because I have a similar feature myself. And when I listen to people, I connect dots.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you were talking earlier about how you had to listen to that internal voice, and it was the internal voice that was encouraging you when you were really facing a tough time. And then fast forward, you got so good at listening to your inner voice that when somebody else is talking to you, I mean, you're listening to their inner voice. And so you're doing what like probably 70% of people on earth need to do, but they don't do. So talk about the value of being able to listen to that inner voice. What are we missing out, the rest of us? What are we missing out on?
You mean when I listen to my own inner voice or somebody else's?
Both. I think that people, the types of people who can't hear anybody else's inner voice, are also probably the types of people who can't listen to their own inner voice.
Yeah, it's so I define it the way that I describe it from a negotiation perspective is the difference between haggling for something and negotiating for something.
Okay.
So haggling is a zero sum game. Somebody wins and somebody loses when you haggle.
Okay.
And that's just kind of, so I met somebody who was super excited to tell me that he had gone out to pizza with some of his buddies. And he's like, yeah, I negotiated with the pizza guy to get my price down. I was like, that is not a negotiation. That is a haggle. That is not a negotiation. Wow. The benefit was there too. That was a lose for the pizza owner, the pizza shop owner, right? There was nothing he was going to win. He lost money on that sale. He didn't make his margin on that sale because this guy haggled it, right? So that's not a negotiation. That's a zero sum game.
Okay.
So when we don't listen to our own voice in our own head, I always say that in negotiation, if you don't believe something and ask for it, you're not going to get it. And if you ask and if you don't believe enough to ask, so you just don't ask, you're not going to get what you want in life. And if you ask, but you don't believe that you deserve what you're asking for, you're not going to get it either. Mm-hmm. So if we have this internal dialogue that is the what ifs, or I assume this, or I want this, but I don't think I'm going to get this, so I should ask for something less because I don't want to seem this negative thing, or this, I don't want to be greedy, I don't want to be this, I don't want to be whatever the negative thing is that we're putting in our heads. If we don't deal with that internal dialogue, then you're never going to be successful in negotiating, because you have to be confident that you deserve what you're asking for. And you do that by being prepared and having a sense of what the other side also needs in order to be successful, which is why you have to start listening to what people are saying, but not with the words that they're using. So UCLA did a study, and 93% of communication is through tone and nonverbals. Mm-hmm. Only 7% of communication is with the words that come out of our mouth. So if you're only paying attention to the 7%, you miss 93% of what somebody is trying to tell you, mm-hmm. right? And so you've got to start to listen to that because if you don't listen for that, then you lose the opportunity to create value for you and for the person that you're working with. Mm-hmm. I obviously read a lot. So there's this huge study out of Copenhagen about how much in a negotiation, let's say you're negotiating for something that's 100, we'll say it's 100% of something.
Okay.
Reality, the value of that 100 is probably 142, but that no party in the negotiation is actually looking for the 42%. And my view is that we ignore and we miss that 42% value because we're only listening to 7% of the conversation.
Right.
And even then, we're not even listening to 7%, because what a lot of people do, like I'll do an exercise. So I encourage everyone to do this exercise at home. Come up with an open-ended question. So an open-ended is something that cannot be answered with yes and no.
Okay.
So come up with an open-ended question. Take your phone and set your timer for 30 seconds. Ask a group of people that one open-ended question, and then hit your timer. And you cannot say a word for 30 seconds.
Okay.
30 seconds.
Can we try this?
Sure.
Let's try it. All right. Tell me what to do.
So why don't you ask me a question, an open-ended question.
Okay. Where do you see yourself in 3 years? So I'm not supposed to be saying anything. And we're live on air. I'm going to say something. Ladies and gentlemen, we're listening to Christine McKay right now. She is absolutely phenomenal. We probably got about 10 seconds left, and we'll see how to wrap up this exercise. And
yes, 30 seconds it feels like a long time, but what happens is that if you listen, right, and we're on a show, so it's hard. 30 seconds of dead air is a long time for dead air. But if you're sitting in a group and you ask an open-ended question, and you just start to wait and observe what's going on and how people are interacting around you, you're going to see a few things. You're going to see people who jump right in, who they've got to be heard. They have to have something to say, right? All the time. So they're just going to talk. Listen, but look for the people who aren't saying anything. And look at them, like physically square your body so you're looking at that person, because then that kind of shuts down the other person, and you're trying to create an opening for this quiet one to start to talk. And wait, because that person's not going to talk until toward the very end, maybe the last few seconds of that 30 seconds. They might not start. They might wait to talk. Right. But then when they do, they have something super meaningful to say. Another thing that I encourage people to do is that once you've asked a question, if somebody answers it, count to 10. Especially if it's a challenging topic, count to 10 before you respond. Because what a lot of people do when they listen is their ears are like picking up noise. They're picking up vibrations, but their brain is running ahead and anticipating what's actually going to be said. Have you ever been in a situation where you've started to ask a question and the person who you're asking it to kind of tries to finish the question? Or you start to say something and they try to finish what you're going to say because they've made an assumption that they know what you were going to ask or what you're going to say, regardless of whether that was true or not. And if it wasn't true, because there are times when it's not true and they haven't accurately figured it out, and then it derails the whole conversation, because then you're like, okay, whatever. Right. They clearly have some place they're trying to go in their head. And so we lose the opportunity to make those connections to find that 42%. And that's if people would just listen differently, listen intentionally and fully, my personal view is we'd have less conflict. We'd be able to resolve things and live, because when you're negotiating, you have to negotiate with a mindset of abundance versus scarcity. And what a lot of the haggling thing is about scarcity. That's a scarcity mindset that's going into that negotiation. I have this thing, it's concrete, I can divide it, but I either get more or they get more, or I get less and they get more, right? And so, but once you start thinking about this 42%, wait, this thing that we're negotiating for could be 42% bigger that we could share in, 42% more if we just communicated differently, listened intently, and could hear that 93% of the communication that isn't words coming out of somebody's mouth.
Christine, are you able to provide us today with an example of an effective negotiation?
Well, there are a lot of them. So give me kind of an area though that.
I'm thinking a lot about the child welfare system. I'm thinking a lot about foster care, and just getting good information to that entire space of people right now. And everybody's in a situation where, for the most part, they really need, whether it be funding from the government, they need to explain why they're valuable to the government for the funding. And at the same time, you have young people whose lives are in the balance as a result of the retainment or non-retainment of that funding. And so a lot of agencies across America right now are in this different type of position where they need to hurry up and become a negotiator, sometimes with the government. Yep. So I'm wondering, how can a adoption agency, or even me myself, I grew up in foster care, and I want to figure out how to provide services to youth in care as well. How do we negotiate in this particular era?
So it's the same way as you'd negotiate with anything else, whether you're buying a car or buying a company. It's the
Okay.
same thing. So the first thing is you have to figure out what it is that you want. What is your ask, right?
Okay.
Then you have to figure out, once you know what you want, then you have to figure out, how does that want, what's the impact of that want on the person or the company that you're asking for it from, right?
Mm-hmm.
How does that system work? What are their obligations? Because at the end of the day, there are exceptions to pretty much everything. And
Okay.
so, right, you get told no, you get told, oh, we can't do that, or we don't do this, or we don't fund this way. It's like, then it's like, well, okay, so getting very clear on what that system is, what that process is, and figuring out what's kind of the gray areas to the side of it, right? People talk about negotiation as this, straight line thing, or this black and white thing, but negotiation is all gray area. That it
Okay.
is all about figuring out what the gray. Now, at some point, it kind of fades and it doesn't make any sense. But it's like, so you've got people who say, this is the lane, right? So this is the lane of funding. This is the agency. This is this, and this is the lane you have to run in, and you have to do everything in this lane. But there's some stuff on the outside of that just kind of, whether it's specific to different nationalities, whether it's specific to Native peoples, whether it's specific to race, whether it's specific to religion or gender identification, or any of these, there's all this gray area to figure out how to kind of layer things on to create a more definitive argument for what it is that you're asking for.
Mm-hmm.
And having a plan. So like I teach people programs on how to negotiate, and in that we actually talk about, how do you create your negotiation strategy? How do you analyze the situation, your situation and your counterpart's situation, in order to figure out what is the lane and what's the gray area, so that we can figure out how to create that 42%. Mm-hmm. Now, sometimes with the government, it's hard because they can be so rigid at times, and they can also be very short-sighted. And so it can be hard. That's why it's important to have advocates who can work that system, and it's a very complex system. So having advocates who can help you navigate that system. Again, it goes back to what I talked about very early, which is asking. You've got to ask for support in that, because you're not likely to be able to go navigate that effectively on your own. And right. So learning from other people's mistakes, and finding, like in your case, other nonprofit organizations that work with children, not necessarily foster kids, but work with kids in another capacity. How do they work? What are some of the other organizations that kind of you can align with, that are not necessarily doing exactly what you're doing, but are doing something similar? And what lessons can you learn from those similarities? Mm-hmm. That's also huge. That can be hugely important.
Okay. What's the difference between a negotiator and a lawyer?
I love that you asked that question so much. You have no idea. So one of the things is that a lot of people think, they hear the word negotiate, and they think lawyer, and they think that a lawyer is the only one who can negotiate. But you negotiate, and everyone on this call negotiates every single day of your life. You have been negotiating from the time you took your first breath and started screaming that you wanted something because you were hungry, or you had a wet diaper, or you weren't getting something that you wanted. And then you escalated it. And then you started throwing temper tantrums. And then at some point you start hearing no. And then we kind of quit negotiating. So we've kind of created this thing that says that attorneys are the only ones who are supposed to negotiate. But that's completely not true. In fact, in companies even, I just read this statistic. I think it was something like 70 some odd percent of people who negotiate in corporations are not attorneys.
Right.
So attorneys know law. That's what they're good at. That's what they're trained to do. But that doesn't mean that they're good at understanding trade-offs and figuring out how to create more value and, you know, and they're also really good at fighting for their client. That doesn't mean that they're creating bigger pieces of pie. So while there are good negotiators who happen to be attorneys, there are a lot of really bad negotiators who happen to be attorneys. But there are a lot of business people who are amazing negotiators. And then there are a lot of those same business people who turn over a negotiation to an attorney. And as a young person, young people are really good at negotiating. You're really good at it. Don't let the word no scare you. Take the word no and go, okay, no, not that way. No, not at this time. That means no. It could be a yes if I did it a different way. Right. It could be yes if it was at a different time. It could be yes if it was, you know, it's like, think about no is just one door closing and a bunch of other doors opening up for you.
Mm-hmm. Christine, I wish that we had pretty much an hour and a half to just unpack all the things that you know, because your story from where you come from to where you are today is robust. And I think it's an American story that pretty much everybody needs in their hand. I hope that you write a book if you haven't already.
I'm working on it.
You're working on it?
I am. I'm working on it.
All right. Also, let the people know where they can find you real quick, if you can say that, where they can find you.
Well, we talked a little bit about negotiation style. So you can learn your default negotiation style by texting negotiate to 26786. And that's the easiest way to reach me.
Wow. Christine, I want to let you know, I respect your work. I commend your work. And I'm very happy to have had you today. I want to give you a crown. I want to give you a crown today while you're still living. And I want to let you know, Christine McKay, that you are America's next motivator.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. I'll talk to you later, okay?
Talk to you later.
All right. Bye-bye. Ladies and gentlemen, as I always say, each and every episode of America's Next Motivator has something here for you. You just need to stop by and pick it up.